Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the best performing decks in Historic Best of 3. So kind of a weekly meta breakdown. We'll be looking at Untapped GG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that tracks users who use it, their win rates, aggregates it with others. Link is in the video description if you want to use Untapped. We're also going to be looking at a couple other resources, MTG decks for a couple archetypes to look at, as well as a couple decks that content creator Misman's been working on. Got up to number 3 Mythic, been on a crazy run. Really good at Historic. Definitely suggest checking out their channel on Twitch if you enjoy Historic content. Notable thing for this month of November, I guess, if you qualify top 1200, you get into the Historic qualifier. So the next qualifier we can play and stuff like that is Historic. So we're going to be covering a little bit more Historic content for the next month, get people up to speed. The notable thing we had was One Ring and Bowmaster getting nerfed, which has shaken up the format quite a bit. There's a lot more availability for card draw in the format, and it has allowed decks like in the past, things like Auras, things like the various Esper Sentinel style decks. Seasoned Pyromancer is a playable card again, so kind of a different angle of attack with that. So we'll jump in and take a look. We are going to look at popularity of the day from Untapped. Then we'll look at some deck lists and go from there. Everything will be timestamped and deck lists will be included into the video. So popularity of the day, Wizards is about 20% of the meta. In best of 3, I saw this going as high, or at least in best of 1, it was like 40% in best of 1, which was kind of wild. We have Mono Green Devotion at 12%. Then we have like a couple just decks. We have Yawgmoth at about 5, Kethis at about 5, Jund Midrange 4.5, Rakdos Midrange at 3.1. One thing to note with Historic, a lot of people play like pet decks, or there's just so many variations with things you can do, even between just standardized archetypes, that it is sometimes hard to aggregate like a clean list of 100 plus games with this particular configuration. Even like when I was looking at Auras, there's 2 players I've been kind of following through MTG decks that have quite different deck lists, but are both performing pretty well. Wizards got a big bump, like we saw kind of going up to the Arena Championships. Mono Green was everywhere. Wizards kind of came out, beat up on the Mono Green, and we've seen them crisscross in terms of effectiveness. Wizards being at the top, Mono Green, and then everything else has been pretty flat. Nothing like too dramatic. Wizards has picked up slight popularity. We usually see that beginning of the month and end of the month, people trying to get into Mythic, and then players trying to solidify a top 1200 position or 250. In terms of games played data, we are looking October 10th through to the 28th, so about 2 weeks of data, 24,000 best of 3 matches played. And we're going to start off Boros Artifacts with a 79.6% win rate. Kind of a wild win rate, all things considered. 100 games, so not the largest sample size, but still 8 out of 10 games being won by this deck. And we got a couple additions to the deck. The kind of core of the deck is Retrofitter Foundry, as well as Ornithopters, or just Thopters in general. You have Yotai that can also make Thopters to get you 4/4s. In grindier games, it lets you tap on tap and make artifacts to kind of go from there. You have Esper Sentinel, which is playable again since it doesn't get pinged by Bowmaster. Giver of Runes in this list is kind of nice because it protects your creatures, but also gives something like Ingenious Smith, which can get very large, an ability to then get pseudo unblockable because you get protection from color your control or even colorless. Copy of Shadow Sphere for lifelink and trample is another way of evasion, as well as just kind of swinging life. The Barb Spike as well makes a Thopter, so you have effectively 12 Thopters with some upside in it. Mashiko is a way to pump your team, especially with a trample or like an evasive flyer. It gets a lot of value. And kind of the interesting tech that we see in addition to the Giver of Runes is we have both Improvised Club as well as Shrapnel Blast. And both of these are basically instances of sack an artifact or a creature. Most likely with Shrapnel Blast, it's just the artifact. And then you'll either deal 4 or 5 damage to any target. Shrapnel Blast is specifically to creature or player. Shrapnel Blast is to any target. But even just having like a 2-mana deal 5 to their face in an already aggressive deck goes a long way. You can also fling like your lands here to get some value. The one thing in this deck that I would probably change, instead of the Needle Verge Pathways, I would likely just play the draw, or even maybe instead of Battlefield Forge, you can kind of play with the numbers a bit. There's the Horizon Lines in this format. So Sunbaked Canyon, I would look to play some numbers of those. While it does ping you whenever you add mana, I think the having the advantage of being able to just draw when you kind of flood out in a deck that doesn't really draw outside of Ingenious Smith can have a lot of utility in that respect. So then moving on, we have Izzet Wizards at 68%, so still really good showing. This one's got 13,000 games played of the deck, and this is the list that won the Arena Championship. The one notable thing, you could probably go back to opt or consider kind of the card draw variant in the 1-drop slot. This was being played because of Bowmaster, the sleight of hand, but having the instant speed has a little bit more utility there. Symmetry Sage is kind of the engine of the deck, buffing up your team along with Balmor, and then you're able to like flashback bigger spells. Think with Dreadhorde Arcanist with the additional power bump. His version's on the full 4 Flame of Anor, drawing you 2 cards, destroying an artifact, or dealing 5, which kills pretty much every creature in the format that you care about outside of Cavalier of Thorns. Notably, this is only to target creature, not to Planeswalker, which you can't hit a Karn, you can't hit a Kiora. Reckless Rage is another removal spell in addition to all the kind of standard burn, Spike Field Hazards, Strangles, a couple Play with Fires, and the Wizard's Lightning as well. Card advantage between the Flame of Nor, Expressive Iteration, and Sleight of Hands. And then you get big damage outputs with the Reckless Charge in this particular build. Your sideboard, and I realized I didn't include the sideboard of the Boros Thopters deck. Deafening Silence for like heavy spells, good against mono green, just kind of combo decks. Kethis, Pithing Needle for Graveyard Hate, Portable Holes for removal, Soul Guide Lanterns, Stone of Eric. So just kind of Graveyard Hates, removal, and kind of combo hate with like the Nykthos is pretty much the deck. So then we're going to Izzet Wizards, and we have Tormod's Crypt for Graveyard Hate, activated abilities with Pithing Needle, Planeswalkers, lands, stuff like that. More removal between Reckless Rage, Strangle. You have Spell Pierces in here, Aether Gusts for red or green stuff, Snapcaster Mage for the grindier matchups, as well as Unlicensed Hearse and Brotherhood's End. So the big thing is a lot of decks have kind of shifted from Brotherhood's End when Bowmaster was around because there wasn't these artifact decks. Brotherhood's End is very good against these artifact decks because you pretty much clean out everything that they have, especially because they're Lurrus shells. There's some of the blue-white affinity builds that do go up to like larger creatures that wouldn't necessarily get hit by Brotherhood's End, but against the Lurrus builds, you pretty much clean out their board for 3 mana. We'll then move to Jeskai Control. So this is 59% win rate. So I believe this is the version from Missman as well. But it is a blue-white splash red control deck. You're splashing red for Expressive Iteration, for card advantage, Lightning Helix, which helps against the Wizards matchup, killing all their creatures plus gaining you some life. So those are the only red cards in the main board. You have Sweepers with Divine Purge, which also incidentally really good against the artifact deck. Green Verdicts, Fragment Reality, catch-all kind of removal spell, where against like some of the smaller decks is pretty much no downside. Like against Wizards, if you hit their 1-drop, doesn't really do much. Snapcaster to kind of get you value. Kind of cool interaction is if you Snapcaster back Divine Purge, you exile your Snapcaster. While it does get taxed 2 more mana, you get to kind of recast your Snapcaster. Change the Equation as a counterspell. Reprieve as Tempo Bounce. This gets around uncounterable stuff. Gets around Dovin's Veto, which is kind of cool in the mirror. Archmage Charm as counter or card draw. Even stealing stuff like Archmage, or like any of the Wizards, the 4/4 tokens from the Thopter decks. Ring for card advantage, Teferi for card advantage, and then Farewell as kind of a catch-all exile effect. Your mana base, interesting to see Mana Confluence in a control deck, but that helps the mana color fixing. You are kind of like red-white, red-blue, white-white, blue, kind of get a little taxing. Castle Ardenvale, Hall of the Storm Giant as your alternate win conditions. Your sideboard, you have Marches, Rending Volley as catch-all removal, or like blue-white hate, Stone of Eric for like against the Yogg combo, any sort of like dying to exile style effects, Aether Gust red-green things, Dovin Veto for the control matchup. Molten Impact is a nice card to have to the side. Hitting planeswalkers, but also kind of stacking. So if you're dealing with smaller creatures, it can have stack damage. Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. Then you have Mystical Disputes as more counters. You have Narsets for anything in like the control mirror, forcing them to screw up their card draw availability. Another Verdict as a sweeper, and then Shark Typhoon as an alternative win condition. What you may want is if there's an uptick in the number of these like artifact decks, or even auras itself, you may want another Divine Purge just because it gets around some of the indestructible style effects, and then just kind of screws up like even their, it hits their lands, it hits their, like you could hit their Darksteel Forge, you can hit their equipments, you can hit their Shadow Spears or Retrofitter Foundry. So it hits them on a couple different angles. Even if they bring in stuff like Pithing Needle, you can hit it that way as well. So that's Jeskai Control. Then we'll move on. So this is Mono Green Devotion. So this is just kind of a player Capella playing the previous mono, like the #1 Mythic deck from Kepler. They're 51-23 with this deck, and it is the Devotion Shell. We see the 3 copies of Elvish Mystic, just increasing the number of 1-drop accelerants now that they don't get hit by Bowmaster. Still the Delighted Halflings in here. 2 Grizzled Huntmaster lets you tutor from your sideboard. Creatures as needed. Old Growth Troll, Pelucranos, Timeless Witness lets you rebuy stuff. Cavalier Thorns, and Abhorrent Collects on the top end. Storm the Festivals, Utopia Sprawls, all kind of the stock package. This version's on 1 Nissa. And then with Karn, you're basically going to be tutoring up a Wishboard. So with the Grizzled Huntmaster, you have access to Haywire Might, Bramble Familiar, which you can use Fetch Quest on it, as well as Cityscape Leveler or Woodcaller Automaton. The Woodcaller or Staff of Domination with animating a land, if it's like Nykthos or that, can let you go infinite, lets you draw out your whole deck. Lets you effectively gain infinite life, lets you tap down all their creatures, which is kind of cool, with Nissa kind of doubling up the mana potentially as well. And then you just have like Graveyard Hate, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Activated Ability Hate. With Karn, Liquid Metal Coating, you can blow up their lands, but also on their upkeep, just target a permanent with activated abilities and they can't activate it. Stonebraid for combo hate. Pestilence Cauldron lets you rebuy stuff. You cast the backside of the Cauldron. Staff of Domination's a combo piece. Sky Sovereign to blow up stuff. Mightstone, Meekstone as removal or card advantage. Chroma's Memorial is really good against like the black or red based decks. Effectively, when you're doing your Storm turn, if you could commit a lot to the board that turn, you can fetch a Chroma's Memorial. All your things get haste, so you can kind of kill them that turn as opposed to passing the turn. Cityscape Leveler blows up everything. Portal to Phyrexia is another kind of reanimation, or like 3 sacks out of your opponent, then you start getting value out of the graveyard. Woodcaller Automaton animates lands, gets you some value, and then Darksteel Citadel when you need to fetch for a land. We then move to Historic Jund Midrange, and this list is 21-14, but we've seen a few, like I've seen a couple of these Jund shells put up like 60+% win rate. A couple players that I've been following to see, and kind of the tech that we've seen. So they have the Delighted Halflings. You still have your Crucius, Jarsoul package. Crucius obviously getting much better now that Bowmaster's out of the format. But a lot of them are playing Questing Druid. So it provides you some card advantage that then scales and gets bigger in the late game. This card's been picking up popularity in things like Murktide in Modern, seeing some, like, I think Legacy play as well. But you're playing it with like Bloodbraid Elf that gets you advantage, Shieldred's in there, and then just an interesting selection of removal spells here. Kind of addressing the fact that a lot of the aggressive decks, wizards, stuff like that, are more popular. Fatal Pushes coming in. Abrades notably deals 3 damage, but it also can hit artifacts. Go for the Throat as catch-all removal. Lightning Strike, card you don't normally see in these mid-range shells, but can be flexible to go face, but also deal with the creatures. And then Lonely End, either taking loyalty off Planeswalkers. If they minus Karn for the turn, you can kill a Karn. And they can also deal with a creature, and then you could have the potential to gain some life. A 2-3 split between Inquisition and Thoughtseize, and then Minskin Boo on the top end. In terms of mana base, you have Nurturing Peatland for card advantage. a Hive of the Eye Tyrant as the only creature land, and some Forsaken Crossroads. An interesting inclusion. Your sideboard, Haywire Might, Artifact Enchantment Hate, another Inquisition for hand hate, as well as Thoughtseize, Pithing Needles for activated abilities, Soul Guide Lantern for graveyard hate. Interesting to see Blood Tithe Harvester in the sideboard here. You don't have Reflections or like Fable the Mirror Breaker in here. I'm interested to know why they have this over just like a removal spell on the sideboard. But choice in there. Lysishurst, Graveyard Hate, Liliana for control matchups. Calling Ritual like blows out a lot of these low curve Lurrus style shells and provides some added advantage in terms of mana. And then Fade from History. This blows up artifacts and enchantments, so you can kind of one-side your opponent that way there. Then move to Auras. So this is one of the Auras players I've been following, 6325. And this deck here, you have Esper Sentinels for card advantage, Giver of Runes for protection, along with a Selfless Savior. Core Spirit Dancer and Light Paws are your main engines of this deck, where you're going to throw on a whole bunch of auras. There's a Lurrus Companion, but you have like Surge of Salvation for protection, Recommission to rebuy, then just a whole bunch of auras. Things to give haste, things to give you like First Strike, Vigilance, other creatures, card advantage items like Combat Research or Staggering Insight. Generally speaking, you're going to get a copy of Kaya's Ghost Form to just protect your creature, and then the big card here is Ethereal Armor that just stacks and gives a whole bunch of power. You have ways to give like Evasion with the Sticky Fingers, and then Escape Velocity as well as Cartouche of Zeal. Both can give haste, so you can kind of win that turn from casting it. Lurrus of the Dream Den Companion. So then you have like Graveyard Hate, Fragment Reality as catch-all removal, activated ability hate with Pithing Needle, Graveyard Hate counters with Spell Pierce, Dovin's Veto, Heliod's Punishment as a way to kind of mess up your opponent's creatures. That also triggers the aura. And then Hushbringers deals really well with any enter the battlefield style effects. We then go to Yawgmoth. This version is 123 and 51. And this version here, so obviously Bowmaster's out of the format. We see Haywire Mites, we see just the full elf package back in here. So just really focusing on the ramp elements. You still have the combo, so Yawgmoth, 2 copies of Young Wolf, basically can target each other and do an infinite loop of enter the battlefield as well as dying. Notably, you do lose a life every time you do that draw, but it's offset with either Sheoldreds, Zulaport Cutthroats, Prosperous Innkeepers, or Blood Artist. Either Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat drain your opponent out. If you have a Hapatra out, you can increasingly make a large array of snakes. This also is really good at machine gunning down all your opponent's creatures. You have 2 copies of Soul Cauldron in here that can basically copy a Yogg and get the activated abilities there. It gives you more redundancy. Port of Calling and Eldritch Evolution both help you find your key pieces, as well as Elven Chorus is for the grindier matchups, lets you play cards off the top of your library that are creatures, and then gives you the ability to turn all your creatures into mana rocks. Similarly, we have Tyvar as another way to kind of find combo pieces mixed into there. Your sideboard's got just removal in like Fatal Push, Hand Hate, and Thoughtseize. You have Outline Liberator for Artifact Enchantment Hate. Phyrexian Needle is basically Pithing Needle, or Phyrexian Revoker is Pithing Needle, but it's in creature form, so you can tutor for it. Scavenging Ooze for Graveyard Hate, Necromentia for combo hate, Tranquil Furlback as a flexible flip enchantments, artifacts, graveyards, or gain life. Erasta is kind of the tech for the Wizards deck, where you're able to get a bunch of reach creatures to try to... Basically, they have to use either a lot of removal spells on this, a couple pieces of burn, like trade with burn kind of mixed into there, and then most of the times it's going to leave you bodies behind anyways. Pylon as basically a free removal spell. You could convoke in this deck and basically cast it for free. Skyfisher Spider is a way to just have like ability to blow things up, and then Thrun for the heavy removal based matchups. 2 other decks we're going to cover. So this is from Mistman's site. So this Kethis deck he went 15-0 with. He actually had like a crazy streak. He won like 25 straight games at number 3 Mythic rank and couldn't get to number 2. I was catching his stream the other day. But with Kethis, basically you are using Kethis in here to cast legendary cards from your graveyard. What you're basically trying to do is loop Mox Ambers and generate a whole bunch of mana. You repeatedly cast Jace the Perfected Mind to mill yourself 15 cards at a time, allowing you to have enough fodder to use the Kethis multiple times. You generate all that mana, and then eventually you start casting Jace and mill out your opponent. You have Kinnian, which generates a bunch of extra mana for you. Delighted Halfling gets uncounterable for your legendaries. Rona helps you loot through your deck. Emery lets you cast artifacts from your graveyard. And then kind of the tech here, I get the Soul Cauldron, gets the activated abilities. So you can basically, for example, with Rona, if you put a counter on it and exile Emery, or vice versa, actually, no, so you have to do Rona specifically, because Rona has the condition that it untaps. So if you have a Rona out, you exile an Emery, put the ability on Rona, you can now tap Rona to cast Mox Amber. Mox Amber comes into play, it untaps Rona, then you can tap it to cast another Mox Amber and effectively create infinite mana that way as well. There's Unearth to rebuy your creatures, along with Jarsoul, some Fatal Pushes mixed into there as well. Your sideboard, like just more removal, Hand Hate, Graveyard Hate, kind of Death Hate, Haywire Might for artifact enchantments, Assassin's Trophy, Catch-All Removal, Minskin Boo for the control matchups, Urtai's kind of a counterspell removal that comes in the form of a legendary creature, Scarab God for the grindier matchups, and then Urza's Ruinous Blast for aggressive decks. You're able to exile all their creatures. And lastly, Mardu Reanimator was a deck he went 44-5 with. And we kind of had this shell in the past, but so attracts a Reanimator. You have Crucius, Priest of the Forgotten Gods, as well as Unburial Rites. Fable the Mirrorbreaker puts stuff in your graveyard. Crucius puts stuff in your graveyard. Kind of the innovation here, Troll of Khazan Doom. We've seen this in some of the extended formats. Swamp Cycling for 1 helps you find your early line drops, but this effectively lets you have another reanimation threat. So it helps you find lands, but then also gives you a threat afterwards. It's pseudo unblockable in the deck as well. Fatal Pushes, Fragment Realities, and Reprieves all mixed into there. Inquisition, Thoughtseize as Hand Hate. And then you also have the Phyrexian Scrapyard here to discard and have kind of an alt win condition with your creating a Solanu Phyrexia. Your sideboard, just more removal, more hand hates, various kind of things there. And then notably you have Sarah's Emissary, where against some aggressive decks, they don't have a way to kill it, just locks them out of the game as well. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.